Hey everyone, let's go. Let's go deeply personal today. This is about something that many of us have experienced, but might not even have a name for until we really uncover this and look into it. It's this kind of behavior that really creeps into a lot of relationships, and it distorts reality, and it really leaves us questioning our own minds. I'm talking about gaslighting. So let's look at this a little deeply here. So I've been on the receiving end of it, and at times, if I'm honest, I've caught glimpses of it in myself as well. And it's a tough thing to admit, but I think it's necessary if we're going to move forward together and understand this. So let's dive into this a little bit, why it stems from a rigid and constricted mind, and most importantly, how practices like mindfulness and meditation can be the path out of both sides of this. So gaslighting is a kind of mental fog, and if you've been through it, you know what I mean. So imagine you're physically drained, emotionally raw, and someone tells you that your exhaustion is just you being dramatic, or they make your illness an inconvenience for them, right? Or maybe you've voiced a concern, and instead of understanding, they twist it. And they say maybe like, why should I feel for you? Why should I have empathy for you? Why should I listen to you? Something like this, right? It's twisting things around. So in those moments, this is why it's gaslighting, because in those moments you feel like you are being erased bit by bit, right? You start asking yourself, am I too sensitive? Am I the problem? And that's how gaslighting works. It fractures your confidence in your reality and making you dependent on the very person who's distorting it. But here's something that we don't often talk about. Gaslighting, it doesn't just harm the one who's gaslit. It also reveals the rigidity of the one doing it. So when someone gaslights, they're often trapped in their own constrictions, and they're unable to accept vulnerability. They're terrified of losing control and defensiveness, or they're defensive against truths that feel like attacks, right? So it's as if they're locked in armor, and they're convinced that rigidity equals strength, right? They're convinced that their rigidity equals strength here. But here's the irony within that. That rigidity, it's incredibly fragile. It can't bend, it can't adapt, and it ultimately breaks relationships, and sometimes completely beyond repair here. So how do we move through this? How do we navigate these dynamics, whether we've been gaslit or recognizing gaslighting tendencies within ourselves? So for me, the answer has been mindfulness and meditation. So I do mantra meditation, which has been taught to me by a group of monks that I work with. So I learned traditional tantric and mantra meditation through tantric and yogic monks. So these practices, they teach us something that rigidity can't teach us. We have to sit with the discomfort. So instead of reacting from a place of fear or control, mindfulness asks us to both pause and observe. So if you've been gaslit, mindfulness helps you rebuild trust in yourself. It gives you the space to hear your own voice again. You learn to identify, this is my truth, and I don't need external validation for it to be real. So for the gaslighter, meditation is an invitation to face the parts of themselves that they've avoided. It helps dissolve that armor of rigidity, piece by piece, right? So they can approach relationships with openness instead of defensiveness. So they start to realize that vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's a gateway to deep, deep connection. So I remember a time when I was being gaslit repeatedly. Well, my words were twisted, my emotions minimized, and I felt like I was screaming into a void kind of thing, right? And I'm sure that I've done this and other people have felt the same way at certain points in my life. But I also remember another time when the same kind of thing, when I was slipping into these rigid patterns, trying to control a narrative instead of listening with empathy, with an openness, with vulnerability. And the recognition of this allows us to expand beyond this sense of rigidity. So both of these moments, they taught me something profound, that growth always begins with awareness. Always. Without awareness, nothing really happens for us. So when gaslighting is exposed, the response of the gaslighter often reveals the depth of that rigidity. So instead of curiosity or a willingness to reflect, they often react with offense or anger or hostility. And why? Because acknowledging such behavior threatens the narrative they've constructed about themselves. It's a narrative that often shields them from vulnerability and accountability and discomfort. So in their mind, admitting fault equals weakness. And they lash out as a way to regain control and deflect the truth. On the other hand here, though, a healthy or even a semi-aware individual reacts differently. They may initially feel uncomfortable or defensive, right? And that is perfectly fine for us to initially have this feeling. But their instinct is to understand, resolve, ask questions like, how? How have I hurt you? What have I done? Right? We're looking for specific examples. And this is the thing we want to give gaslighters. We want to give specifics. And that's really difficult for them to hear, right? It really challenges their entire narrative. But this is because growth requires a willingness to look at ourselves honestly, no matter how painful it is. So somebody who's telling you that you act or behave a certain way but has no real examples for you, it can be incredibly difficult for you to understand that narrative and how to change, right? So the gaslighter's offense and rigid rejection, they contrast sharply with this kind of openness. Their resentment isn't about the information shared, it's about their inability to confront their own shadow. Healthy communication thrives on flexibility and self-reflection, while gaslighting, it perpetuates itself through fear, rigidity, and an unwillingness to see the humanity in both themselves and others. So today I want to leave you with this. Whether you're on the giving or receiving end of gaslighting, there's a way out. Start by sitting with your breath, by watching your thoughts without judgment, and by creating a space for truth, yours and others. Because the opposite of rigidity isn't weakness, it's resilience, vulnerability. I hope this resonates with you. And if it does, just take a moment today and pause, breathe, and reflect. And remember, no matter where you are in this journey, there's always a path toward greater understanding, connection, and freedom.